Welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Ashutosh Sinha, and you're with the Economic Times. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I welcome you to the conversation. The Economic Times and Sophos presents Cybersecurity as a Service. It's a burning topic because of what has been happening in the country if you've been reading the news, particularly in the last few weeks or so. You would have read about hackers getting access to data from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, or AIIMS, as India's premier healthcare institution is called. Well, we're going to be discussing what are some of those challenges that have emerged from this particular incident, of course, but beyond as well. This attack on the systems at AIIMS, corrupted files and data on the main and backup servers of the hospital. Everything was moved to manual mode at AIIMS. It serves about 4 million patients a year. And they had to get back to a paper system for about a week after that. Here's what media reports said just about in the last day or so, a few weeks after the incident has happened. It said, of the 100 servers, 40 physical and 60 virtual, that detailing is important. Of the 100 servers, 40 physical and 60 virtual, 5 physical servers were infiltrated by the hackers. The damage could have been far worse, but it has now been contained. Data in the 5 servers has been successfully retrieved. An unnamed official was quoted as saying in the media. But AIIMS could just be the big fish. The healthcare industry in India has faced about 1.9 million cyber attacks till November 28th, according to a report published by the cybersecurity think tank, CyberPeace Foundation and Autobot InfoSec. The attacks came from a total of about 41,181 unique IP addresses, and these were tracked back to Vietnam, Pakistan, and China. If nothing else, that sounds scary. While this is the immediate picture, particularly of the healthcare sector, cyber attack is a worry for the wider industry as well. India is said to be among the top 3 affected countries in Asia. To discuss the issues and how should companies and professionals handle the situation, we have a stellar panel today to talk about it. So let me introduce the panel to you. B.V. Raghavendra, he's partner cybersecurity at KPMG Assurance and Consulting Services LLP. Vijay Bharti, he's senior vice president and CISO, head of cybersecurity practice, Happiest Mind Technologies. Sovon Mukherjee, CISO, Fincare small finance bank. Harish Goel, Director IT, Security and Compliance at Publicis Resources, and Anthony Merry, Senior Director, Product Marketing at Sophos. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us and being a part of this conversation, particularly in a time like this because of what we are seeing around in India, and it's making quite a bit of news. But before I begin, I'd request Raghavendra to set the context for the conversation. Raghavendra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ashu. Thanks a lot. And thank you all for joining today. I think one of the important topics that we have seen, especially impacting every organization today, not even a single organization is spared. We are seeing significant increase in sophistication of attacks, especially of late, and the ease of attacks with ransomware kits being available on the dark web, which is so easy to launch an attack. So has the landscape. Landscape has increased significantly into our various new adoptions, be it cloud and so on and so forth, where Asia Pacific especially has witnessed increased amount of attacks, I would say, during the pandemic and post-pandemic. So there's been a steady shift from a trends perspective that we've witnessed is in the past days, we used to see a lot of attacks, especially in the financial services sector, but that has seen a significant shift over the last few years towards healthcare segment. And we have seen increased amount of attacks, both on life sciences as well as healthcare. organizations. And this shift actually has caused a lot more panic in the entire environment, because if you was a financial services client and there's an attack, probably there's a loss of, say, finance or loss of money and so on and so forth. Whereas if it is for a healthcare attack, there's could be a loss of life. What we call it as redirects in healthcare industry, where hospital redirects is one of the worst thing that could happen, and the patient doesn't get the required medical care and he's on the streets, redirected from one hospital to another hospital because hospital can't service the client because most of their systems are ransomware, right? So that's the kind of sad challenge we saw, not only just in Asia Pacific, and it's not new to the world. It has happened to multiple other major markets, be it in UK, NHS, be it in Singapore, and so on and so forth, that we have seen this, and it is happening now in the Asia Pacific region as well. And in some of the high profile breaches that we came across in India, we were solving some of them, these are some of the common challenges that we see, which especially phishing attacks, stolen credentials. These are the common main attack vectors that we saw, and clients could take very, very simple steps to mitigate that. I would be happy to have some of my colleagues on this call to talk about what are some of those technology adoptions and simple steps that we can take as we respond to some of these cybersecurity incidents. Back to you, Ashu.
Okay, get the big picture there. That's the big picture. So let's start with the questions. So let me first toss this question to Vijay Bharti from Happiest Minds. Vijay, what are some of those challenges that companies have to face, some of the questions that pop up behind closed doors in those strategy meetings, as you talk about the situation that is changing so rapidly?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ashutosh. See, I think we all understand in a cybersecurity industry, right, and then how things are moving. It's essentially the risk, right? I mean, how do you essentially identify those risks? How do you really look at, from your own perspective, from your business and organization perspective, how much is enough, right? I mean, quantifying those risks and taking appropriate measure is probably one of the biggest challenge which organization facing today, right? In terms of where do you draw the lines? Typically, for example, right, and as we have seen today, no business is virtually spared from these kind of attacks, right? I mean, gone are the days where hackers were coming behind very focused way behind BFSI or certain sectors. Today, as Raghavendra mentioned, the way and means to attack are so easy. The cost of actually launching an attack is much lesser than cost of trying to protect it, right? So organizations are continuously thinking, right, in terms of what is sufficient, where they should invest, what are the various tools and technologies they should adopt, right, to really address some of these. And the risk is continuously changing, right? I mean, as to give you a very simple example, one of the key measures which everybody has to take, right, in today's world to protect against cyber attacks is a strong level of access control. In terms of, we all understand passwords are not enough, right? So everybody recommends to definitely adopt multi-factor authentication. But let me tell you, last 6 months, I have seen multiple cases where hackers have been able to compromise even multi-factor authentications, right? Through social engineering, through smishing attacks, through various other factors. So the risk is continuously evolving. I think as security practitioners and everybody else in the industry, do a continuous evaluation of the risk which you are facing. Don't estimate. I mean, don't make it an annual exercise of doing a risk assessment once. They are evolving so fast. Continuously look at your the kind of tools, technologies, processes you have put in place, and remember, right, this risk and the way attackers are evolving. We have seen cases where hackers and attackers have started leveraging AI/ML to attack, right? We all know ransomware as a service, so where we see the adoption of AI/ML in kind of security technologies to prevent against those attacks. Attackers have always been evolving equally fast, and there are new and better ways of attacking also emerging, right? So I think that the biggest challenge which I see and the biggest need which I see is a continuous evaluation of your risk posture. Understanding the fact that you will be attacked, it's just a matter of time. It does not determine what is your size, industry, and all. And be prepared for it, continuously work towards it.
Oh, that sounds a little scary. You know, it just reminds me of something I heard security officials say in the context of VIP security, but it applies so much here. Here's what he said. We have to be lucky every day. The assassin has to be lucky only one day.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And that is something, unfortunately, where it seems that businesses are headed. So, Sovon, I'd like to come to you for this. How should companies approach the design of their systems? Because Vijay mentioned that constant review is important. So how should companies approach the design of their systems and build the environment and processes around enterprise security so that review is possible and it can happen to meet all kinds of situations? So you're on mute.
As always, sorry. So thanks, Ashutosh, for asking me this important question. See, fundamentally, we need to understand that for cybersecurity, any practitioner, we have a golden rule book called NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And there are 5 pillars of that: identify, protect, detect, respond, and then recovery. I think if NIST has not revisited, cybersecurity professional has revisited and put one more pillar, that is anticipate. And that anticipation is that you are under constant attack and someday you will be compromised. So what is your preparation against that? Cyber resiliency, the terminology is only coined from that anticipate. Yes, either you are hacked or going to be hacked. So what is your preparation about that? The disaster in terms of cyber attacks or any other form, fire, any other forms it may come. So the revisiting of cyber resilience, where it starts is that every controls which are put into layered defense system, which will say what resilience you are put into any security controls, which is not working as intended. You know that there is an EDR at the endpoint. Tomorrow it may happen that EDR in its inert state, it is not responding. It's happening. We have seen your DLP is not working. There are some patches applied to the endpoint and then everything goes for a toss. That's one. And then if tomorrow ransomware or any type of attacks happen, how quickly you get back into the system? Do you have an effective backup plan available? Do you have an effective asset management available? Where your data, you don't know your critical database or critical data store, and tomorrow ransomware happened. Oh my, this data is lost. I have never taken a backup. So fundamentally, your firewall has been taken over. You are now going back to the system. Do you have the backup of the firewall? There are thousands of rules. How can you rebuild in one day? Database backup and then periodic restoration. Are you undertaking religiously? Tomorrow you have seen that you have taken the backup, but there is some corruption happened or something happened. You cannot restore that system. It is more dangerous than something you don't have, because you have that confidence. Yes, I do have. And when the situation arises, you cannot. So I think the main way for any tech professional or cybersecurity professional is that putting into resiliency and backup plan for every system. And that's where I think on top of 5, there is one more required is anticipation. And that is very important, that you will be hacked someday and you should be prepared for that.
Okay. That on that note, let's try and get Harish into the conversation. Harish, so how do you sensitize the top management towards the dynamic risk situation? The promoters or the top management are busy driving businesses. This can slip and maybe become second or third priority. Is that acceptable?
Hey, hi. So, okay. So the top challenge, like Vijay has explained about what is the top challenges the top leadership has right nowadays behind the door when we discuss about all the risk and the security areas. So the biggest challenge which I found is that about the regulatory, complying to the regulatory and following the local laws. It is the biggest challenge because every country is now, because you're saying every country is trying to come up with their own data privacy bill. So I'm not sure where the world is going. Either we are restricting ourselves or we are restricting to the multinational companies to work in their particular region and the domain, or we are asking them to work globally. because if we have the local laws with respect to data privacy, so it's not, I'll say it's next to the impossible that possible that, okay, every organization or each organization can follow each and every laws. So definitely complying to the laws is the biggest challenge. And we spend the another challenge is that we spend more time into the discussion rather than implementing on the ground. So we have seen this, yes, we spend a lot of time discussing with the data privacy team or the legal teams to get the approvals to start doing any kind of initiatives or following any compliance. Or I know, like, okay, there's some solution, there's something which is there in the market, so I have to go for a certain set of approvals. So those approvals, getting those approvals before starting or initiating that any activity is itself is a challenge, or it's a time consuming for the organization. So yes, these are the few areas where like we spend more time. And another is about the compliance and all. Yes, we spend more money into that also. Like our focus is, okay, we have to be compliant. We don't know that, okay, either at the background or at the base it's strong or not. Are we like, if the organization is compliant, okay, we are safe? No, those days are gone. You have to work hard on the ground level rather than just being the compliant as per the compliance and the regulatory. So these are the things I prefer, that I suggest that, okay, we have to look on the ground level. We have to understand what exactly is the ground happening, what is there in the external world is going. We have to learn from those attacks also. Like the AIMS is one of the, yes, there's a recent cybersecurity attack. So other healthcare companies or the organizations, they have to understand, they have to learn where are the gaps and which all the things which got missed by that particular industry, so that we can try to fulfill that gap, and we can fix those areas. And we should not have that kind of attacks, similar attacks, or those kind of areas is coming up again and again. So it's kind of a failure for that organization if those are not learning, or we are not learning from other organizations or these kind of attacks.
Okay. So before I go to Anthony, just a reminder for everyone, in case you want to ask questions about some things, because a lot of people around the industry who work in various industries are watching us. In case you want to ask any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A tab, and we'll try and get the experts to answer some of those questions. I'll try and make it as many as possible. But again, that depends on how many questions you have and how many questions can you put. So we look forward to your questions. Anthony, the situation does look a little worrisome, more than a little worrisome, I'd imagine. For companies which are reviewing, what are some of those basic things? What are some of those fundamentals that need to be reviewed every time so that they are on top of the situation?
That's a very good question, and I agree. It's worrying times at the moment. As Mr. Raghavendra said, everyone can be a victim. You can't believe you are the smallest organization. Nobody might know you, or not many people know you. You could still be opportunistically attacked by threat actors, which is unfortunate. In any cybersecurity situation, I'm sorry to say, but humans, all of us, myself included, we tend to be the weakest link, because even the most security conscious person in a moment of weakness will make a mistake, whether that's accidentally clicking on a phishing email or accidentally copying and pasting our password into a wrong chat. We all make mistakes. So the purpose of many cybersecurity products is reducing the impact when we as a human make a mistake. That's also why some of our panelists here have talked about security in layers of defense. I like to use the Swiss cheese analogy. If an attacker is trying to get into an organization, let's say with a phishing attack, they might get through the first layer. They might send me an email. I might click on a link. It takes me to a website that asks me to authenticate, and I might enter my username and password. They now have my credentials, so they can access the network. That might get them so far, but then they might notice that, why is Anthony logging in from Hong Kong while he's currently based in Brisbane? Your firewall will see that. Your zero trust network will see that. There are other security technologies in place that will help identify that something is not right. So having security in depth is very important. with all of that said, nothing really replaces a good endpoint security product. There should be no reason why nobody has one today. A lot of them can be inbuilt into the operating systems like from Microsoft, but there are plenty of other providers in the market that provide that technology. And why do I say that's important? Well, there's a couple of facts. If you stop a threat from getting in the first place, you don't have to clean it up later. Now, you could stop that threat. It could be at the firewall or it could be at the endpoint. But why I say endpoints are important, it's because they cover such a wide variety of the attack chain, from initial access all the way through to ransomware, that if I, as a defender, am looking at all of that data, it can give me a very good picture about what the attackers have done or are trying to do. So just to sum up very quickly, have layers of defense. You will invest in, companies have invested in multiple IT security products. Use all of those, keep all of that together, and then you need to keep an eye across all of it. And for some companies, that will be a challenge.
Okay, that's interesting. And, it goes with the old story, prevention is better than cure.
Yes.
It's an old story and it works very well. Vijay, how would you put it, the prevention part of it and the layers of defense? Would you like to explain that? And maybe people listening to you, they may want to understand the way to go about it.
Sure, Ashutosh. And that's where I think when we were talking about, right, prevention is better than cure. And you also asked in terms of what is the way to convey some of these messages to the board and the management. This is probably one of the way, right? Although it's difficult to exactly quantify the cost of a cyber breach, right? There are various sources available, there are various estimates available and all, but I think it's fairly easy to be able to showcase to the management that the cost of prevention is definitely going to be less than cost of the cure, right? From our experiences, we have seen once you are attacked, once you are breached, it takes a humongous amount of effort to come out clean, right? The kind of resources, the kind of efforts, the kind of work which goes in terms of rebuilding, backing up all the things, making sure the environment is completely clean, and all the legal and privacy aspects of it, right? I think it's fairly easy to be able to prove to the management that the cost of prevention, of course, whatever ways and means and technology means available as of today, is definitely doable, right? And that's probably one of the recommendations which I give to my fellow security professionals, right? When we discuss in terms of how to talk to the management and that area, right? Now, second thing which I talked about, as you talked about layer defense, right? I think today we also have to understand the way the whole IT landscape is changing, right? Some of the traditional layers of defenses are going away, right? Today we are not in a very parameterized world. Firewalls used to be the first boundary of protection maybe 10 years back, right? But today, when you look at everybody adopting cloud, everybody adopting third-party vendors, the whole IT spread has been evolving, right? So some of these layers you have to start thinking about these layers from inside out, right? Not outside in. So look at, right, in terms of how can you start moving security closer to the source, right? How each and every server can be protected. And that's where, for example, concept like zero trust starts coming in, right? From an endpoint security, for example, Anthony mentioned, right? The traditional approach was trying to block anything bad, right? But now the whole approach is changing, that only allow proven good to execute, right? Block rest everything. So you have to start thinking about these layers from inside out. Look at what are the crown jewels of your organization, what are those key critical data which you are trying to protect, where it resides in your organization, whether it is on-prem or on cloud. How do you start baking in security right from the OS level, right? Encrypt the data, make sure the access control is there, right? Only authorized people are allowed to access it. So yes, layer defense is definitely required, but how do you start building those layers has started changing a little bit because the way now IT is getting delivered, right? So that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Okay. Okay, Raghavendra, the increase in sophistication, because we spoke of layered, the way the sophistication is also increasing for the attacks and the ease of attacks also that you mentioned a little while ago. How is that worrying for the small and large companies, and how is it turning into a challenge for the wider industry?
Absolutely. No, I think so. As we see, a lot of one of the things that we've been trying to track is as soon as there's something called as vulnerabilities in these applications, whether there has been any traction in the dark web, are there any utilities being created using those vulnerabilities? Are there any weaponization, what we call it as, of some of those loopholes in the systems that are getting weaponized in the dark web, which we also call it as threat intelligence, which is extremely important for every organization to gather and prioritize, especially the huge number of patching that they would be behind on most of these organizations. How do we start looking at some of those aspects and take weaponized elements to prioritize and patch some of them? These are kind of simple steps. Say you have 10,000 vulnerabilities and you can't fix all of them. You would have to look at what is getting weaponized in the dark web. What are those utilities that are getting developed? Basis that, you go ahead and basically address those vulnerabilities in your systems. This is again reduces the effort that is needed, but yet gives a quick win, right? Those are some of the things that we have seen, especially in the market, and which is quite helpful, because the moment there is a published vulnerability or unpublished vulnerability, you start seeing some action, especially in dark web, where people are developing some of these utilities, and these utilities are made available at a cost. There are credentials being sold at a particular cost. So people don't even have to perform a phishing attack, to what Anthony was mentioning, as phishing is one of the common elements. People don't even have to do, they can buy credentials on the dark web and then use that as and when they want. And some of the simple measures that clients could adopt may not necessarily very sophisticated. Simple measures could, like what Anthony was mentioning, having a proper visibility within the organization at endpoint levels, which is quite simple to achieve today. And that's something that we can actually, it gives you a good amount of insights in what's going on in your environment. Ensuring the backups is another element that can actually help a lot, especially in ransomware situation, to get back to business. So we have seen many organizations have done backup, but they have not looked at those backups whether they really work or not. So some of those aspects actually help a lot for organizations. And also very common vector that I can't stop without saying is the multi-factor authentication, which we call it as a simple element, so that these credential breaches is one of the common attack vector. How can it be mitigated with a simple multi-factor authentication? Factor authentication, for simple words, something that you have and something you know, right? A password and something that you have, right? It could be a simple OTP as well. I think adopting some of these simple measures have actually helped a lot in curtailing some of these attacks. And attackers have to get further sophisticated. And as you rightly said, they have to wait for that one lucky day, right?
Yeah.
So making it harder for them is what some of these adoption of some of these simple steps actually helps with. And of course, I can't end without saying about incident response drills, which are so much important, because you can't say that it will not happen to me, but we will have to continue to practice on how do we respond and how do we recover from the situation.
Okay. So let me now try and get Sovon into the conversation. Sovon, the challenge that any bank faces, even if you're a smaller entity compared to a larger bank, give us a sense of that. How can a smaller bank, or how difficult is it for a smaller bank to address the challenge that is, and the challenge that is rapidly evolving, changing, and the targets maybe, if I may use the term in the context of the targets for the hacker, the goalposts are changing.
See, any financial organization for the hackers is a gold mine for them, because they know that ready cash is there. And bank, it means a lucrative term for ages. It's one of the target for what I say, lone wolf hackers or the APTs, which are because the entire banking industry is working on trust. And if you can break that trust, there will be a direct impact on the social front. Unrest can be created. Think about a targeted attack on a bank. Now, we need to understand one thing categorically is that other than state-sponsored or very targeted attack, like SolarWinds, like what we have seen, US gas pipeline attack, colonial pipeline attacks, and all these things. It is what I believe is that you have to understand is that all the hacking tools are which sophisticated hacking tools are absolutely free and readily available in the market. You need not require to go. And believe me, a few days ago, there was an interview happened and that guy called, he has hacked and he told that I learned everything from YouTube. So how to, if you have been given how to make a missile, nuclear missile on the YouTube, probably someday it will also come. Nuclear warhead, how can you prepare? So in a physical world, the amount of destruction it can create by a nuclear bomb, the same in the digital world, what hacking can done is available on the YouTube. You can learn everything. A 10th script kiddies are creating havoc now. Now, what I say in this scenario is one of the most important thing is your external posture management. So let me give you an analogy. If you are four, there is a very good analogy that you have four friends in the jungle and all of a sudden a wild bear came in front of you. What will be your strategy? To beat the bear? Definitely not, you cannot. So your strategy should be to beat the last person, your last friend. So you should not be the last person. So what Raghavendra has told, the sophisticated automated tools are running continuously, and anybody who is handling operational security, they knows that this scanning, this probing is indefinitely happening on their boundary firewalls. The traces are there. Now you cannot go and block the entire IPs, then your firewall will be overloaded. So it is happening. Now, what thing you can ensure that you don't have publicly known or publicly exposable vulnerabilities? So if you also do the same things and plug those gaps before the hacker identifies, you are probably safe. So fundamentally, hackers also concentrate on those things which are easily breakable. Other than state-sponsored or APTs, they don't have indefinite time and resources. They will go find an easy target, do some ransomware, whatever they have got, collect it and come. So fundamentally, you should not be the easy target. So posture management in terms of internal BAPT, it is now even become paramount that you are doing external BAPT or red teaming on your external posture, so that somebody scanning, he should not identify this thing. Same way, there are services available for dark web monitoring. If there is any chatter, any social, your Google Docker or all these sites, if there is a chatter about your organization, then you should have a third eye on that. A lot of chatter is happening, something is going to happen. So your threat intel should be sound enough, your external posture management should be sound enough. And last thing is there, your cyber immunity. You cannot, what you say is layered defense prevention is better than, but how can you prevent a pandemic like COVID? Then you have to stop breathing. In the digital world, you have to expose your services to the public. That's what your existence is. That's what your services are. How will you do that? You have to bring out a proper management or SOPs or process for your cyber immunity, like your BA, your configuration audit, hardening of the system, two-factor authentication. There are layered of systems. So you have to think about it holistically. And anything which is till date, anything exposed outside, it is vulnerable. Now it has happened that insider are the biggest threat. So anything there in the inside also, that is also a great risk. So you need to see whether inside or outside, you should do both the parameters, and you always follow a better cyber immunity so that the loose ends is nowhere. A hacker is an outsider till the time he has not access to your internal system. And believe me, none of the ransomware attack happened by the external agencies because they become your insider. They laterally move your network. They identify the gold mines, your data source. They exfiltrate the data. By the time what they have done, it is average 180 days, they are insider. They are not a no more external entity. So you need to understand that you have to see internally, no, it is internal, so it is okay. No, that days has gone. That's why zero trust, micro segmentation, all this thing has come into action. So there are a lot many things to do. And
very interesting point. Anthony, I'd love to, while on this topic, I'd just like to mention, the key data or the crown jewel, you use the term crown jewel as well. How should companies approach keeping it away from the reach of the hackers, even if there is an attack and there is an attempt as well? Anthony.
Keeping the crown jewels safe is the job for any IT security organization, just as keeping the attackers out is part of their job as well. So I'll repeat something that Mr. Vijay brought up. If we look at today's environment, users can be anywhere. You've got physical assets, you've got resources in the cloud, you've got SaaS business applications. Your data is also everywhere. So if the way I look at things, a company's data is its crown jewels. If you lose your data, what can you do? Can you still keep on operating your business? That's why I look at data as the crown jewels of a company. So how do you do that? Well, obviously you protect all the different layers of your organization. Everywhere you have data, you protect access to it. Now that could be identity management. It could be things like encryption. It could be your endpoints, your firewalls that protect access to a SaaS application. It could be your email security, or the network security, or the cloud security, access to those cloud resources. The issue with all of that is that's a lot of noise. And if you look at any IT organization, they'll have multiple security tools to defend the different parts of their environment. If we look at the attacks today, they are too complex. They're rapidly evolving. They're changing all the time. Defenders are racing to keep up. They've also then, as I just mentioned, they have too many tools. How do they stay on top of that? Do you have enough people to do that? And if you do, can they handle the amount of workload that's coming through? Keep in mind that these attackers, they're experts at avoiding detection. They spend a lot of time, what the industry calls dwell time, inside an organization because they're not detected. They traverse through the network or laterally move through the network to find out where are the crown jewels, where are the backups. That's why ransomware attacks are so effective. Not only can they manage to encrypt everything, they delete the backups, so it's very hard to recover from it. And then because of all that noise, defenders don't know where to look. So they basically need help. What I'm painting is actually not a very nice picture. I'm sure some of our listeners can recognize it as well. IT teams, that they're understaffed, they're under budget pressure, just like everyone else is. They're struggling to keep up and manage the tools that they have today. But in short, they're utterly overwhelmed, they're exhausted, and yet they're still attacked day after day by attackers. So as a result, a lot of these organizations, they're inadequately protected, and that's a big problem. So companies need to do something about that. They need to find that needle in the haystack. They need to identify the important signals to let them know there's a problem here. You need to go take care of it. Now, there are tools such as XDR, extended detection and response, that can do that. But it requires the skill set to do that. Do you have the employees that are capable of running that type of tool? If you do, great. They can do it. They can help you. They can help identify, this is unnecessary noise. I don't need to look at that. This is where I should focus. This is where the security team or the IT team should spend their valuable time. And I'll say something slightly controversial. I hope you don't mind me saying. And that's essentially, in my opinion, cybersecurity has become so complex and so difficult, and it moves so fast that many organizations simply can't keep up. And you need to have a look at your own organization and make a value judgment to say, yes, I can handle this. I can keep up with the threats. And if you can, that's great. If you can't, that's also okay. Admitting that you need help is not a bad thing. And that's when somebody like a managed detection and response provider can actually come in and help augment your security team. Or in fact, if you want to just focus on your core business, what you do, and let them handle the cybersecurity for you because they are experts in that field, that's a valid option too. My advice at that point in time is make an honest and objective decision on, can you keep up with cybersecurity and all the threats? If you can, great. If you need help, there is no shame in asking from help from an MDR provider or someone similar. In my mind, that helps keep protecting the crown jewels of the company or the data, because there are simply so many ways for an attacker to come in and take it or delete it. Everyone needs help.
Okay, so let's, before I go to Harish for the next question, let's try and put a poll question for the people who are watching us and people who are listening to us. So can we have the poll question? Let's try and get the poll question, because also, since Anthony mentioned, it could be a third-party element to this as well. So third-party risks are critical for enterprises. How are they handled in your company? This is a poll question for people who are watching. Now, the answers to these questions can only be given by the people who are watching us. All the speakers and me cannot answer this question. So there you see the situation changing as people put in their questions. So the more answers we have, the more people who make their choices, it gives us a sense of what this limited audience, people who are watching us and listening to us, what they have to think. So as we look at it, about 42 answers are already in, and the number is going up. So we'll try and well, just a few more seconds before people make up their mind and see what the trend looks like, what the thought among the people looks like. Third-party risks are critical for enterprises. How are they handled in your company? Okay, let's try and put an end to the poll. We've quite a few responses. About 50% people have, and that's the answer. The biggest number, registered device. That's the third part. That's the access that we set only for registered devices. With that authentication password that comes. Regularly review of the policy, 1/4. About similar for restricted to only specific profiles can access that, and all partners can. So that sounds good that everyone's not allowed access. I imagine that sounds good for the poll question. So that's the final. Let's move on and move to the question. So this just gives you a flavor. That's the whole idea of putting this question. Harish, let's take the next question to you and ask about, because we are speaking of regularly reviewing the situation, what are some of the fundamentals that must be reviewed every time companies, enterprises are talking about preparing for a disaster in the light of changing environment? Harish.
Okay, so when we talk about the business resilience, that okay, we have to have the disaster recovery in terms of the critical applications and the sites. So definitely it is good that okay, in case of any disaster and all, we should have that kind of site to be set up, and so that we can switch on and our business remains continue and we don't have any kind of impact. But yes, as Anthony mentioned, hackers are more advanced. They know what all the things are there already in the world, and what all the tools are getting used, and how you are managing your backups and all, how you're managing your disaster recovery sites and all. Like, they have these kind of information. They are more advanced. We just have to look, we have to think like a hacker, I'll say in that way. Because if we more work on the reactive, no, it will not work. We have to work more proactive and think from the hacker's mind. And we have to have some kind of activities so that we can prevent our organization from, not 100% I'll say, but yes, still we can restrict our organizations to having a kind of a cyber attacks. If we take some kind of a proactive measures. So I'll give you an example of like gap assessment. Okay, when I say the gap assessment, so basically, okay, we have the tools in our organizations, and whenever there's a problem, we go to the vendors and the OEMs and we say, yeah, boss, this is a problem, we have it. So what is the solution? So they suggest some kind of tool to us, and we added that tool to our environment. So what is happening that we are keep on adding the tools and environment, but we don't know what exactly is the tool does and what is the return of investment we are getting from those tools. So that is the biggest problem, that, okay, we are investing money into the tools, but we are not we don't know how we are using and how effectively and efficiently we are using. Second, about the environment of, like, we have the environment, we know these are the security solutions we have in the environment, these are the ways we are handling, but organizations have a fear, or they don't go for the kind of assessment. So now this is again kind of a, I'll say not the trending, but yes, the companies have started, they go for the third party security solutions, or the controls, you have it for the validation assessment. So they go for that validations and they get the report and they try to fix it. So this is the way, like, okay, this is the way we think from the hacker's perspective, that, okay, tomorrow I know the tools are there, I know it is not effectively getting used. So if I'll get the assessment, I'll get to know which are the areas where the gaps are there, which are the areas we have to fix it. And instead of realizing later in case of any security incident or breach, it's better that we do it earlier and we fix it and we manage it. And because any incident, definitely it will have a cost to the organizations, and it will definitely have a bad impact on the reputation of any organizations. So every day we have a kind of different kind of attacks there happening in the different organizations. So definitely it spoil their reputation in the market in terms of the, might be the shares, and in other ways, the clients and the stakeholders.
Sure.
These are the areas, definitely, I'll say.
Okay. So Vijay, the question that is often asked, maybe behind, well, not just behind closed doors, it's also asked otherwise. Are you ready when an incident has occurred, or do you have a plan in place? Is your organization prepared for any eventuality like this, where an incident happens? How easy are these questions to answer when they are put in such simple words and straight words?
Yeah, I mean, see, in reality, if you ask me again as a CISO, right, you are always scared of that situation, right? If you have to be in that situation, we do have, I mean, certain frameworks, certain guidances,
sure,
certain theories, right, in terms of having incident response plans in place to be able to proactively do what we call as tabletop exercises, right, in terms of what is going to be the role and responsibility, assuming that certain major incident happened, then how are we going to react to it? We try to identify what will be the role of different stakeholders as part of the overall incident management. We do some of the drills, right? Cyber drills in terms of simulating, not actual simulating, but again, more from a tabletop perspective.
Sure.
So there are, from a planning perspective, we do have certain mechanisms to make sure that we are ready for some of those incidents. And today's world, right? I mean, certain guidelines, of course, are very, very important. And that's the kind of attacks which are happening, right? Of course, we all talked about data backup. Now we all understand ransomwares. There's no cure for if you get impacted by ransomware, right? You will be extremely lucky if you can find a decryptor which will be able to decrypt your files and restore it back, right? So the only option left in those cases are to be able to rebuild your server from the backups which you have. Similarly, domain which gets a lot of stress today is the overall domain of cyber resilience, right? In terms of evaluating yourself against cyber resilience, in terms of what happens when you really face these kind of attacks, right? How the organization will respond to it. And how do you ensure that you be able to achieve some level of business continuity, right? For example, from AIM's example also, which we talked about, right? And although the servers was logged, there were a lot of backlog, but still they were operational. They were trying to manually manage the situation, still attend to the patients and everybody, right? So every organization has to be really prepared proactively, as Harish talked about, in terms of having those plans in place, and not only having those plans in place, but actually drill them, right? Like to do some tabletop exercises in terms of what happens when you react to those situations. Similarly, it's also important to have certain, as Anthony mentioned, certain firms identified who can help you in any such situation, right? In terms of digital forensics, in terms of major breach investigation. There are organizations which can help you do your ransomware negotiations, right? Apart from your cyber insurance companies, right? So based on where you are, right? So you should identify some of these external partners whom you can call in case of actual breach does happen. at least have some level of contract, some level of identified point of contacts, right? Who can be reached out, and wish for the good luck, right? I mean, how you will actually handle on ground as things become very, very different. But at least from a preparation perspective, there are frameworks, there are guidelines available which should be adopted by all of us. Okay, so Raghavendra, I'll ask you about the challenges that happen or companies face in terms of the tabletop exercise vis-a-vis the execution. But let's start with some of the questions. I'll come to that point in a little while. Let's start with the questions for the viewers, and we have Sripriya joining us, and she has a question. And Sripriya, please go ahead, and if you can ask your question.
Yeah, good evening all. This is Sripriya. I'm AVP Compliance from Brickwork India Private Limited based on Bangalore. So we are into business support services to global customers. So basically, like if you look at our service offerings, our data is lying in email and we go with the cloud storage. So like third-party cloud storage tool like Microsoft. So in those scenario, for how can we apply preventive measures on restricting the cyber threat? Because it again depends on the vendor also, right? We cannot like have the complete control on us when we are exercising any BCP tabletop exercise. Also, we cannot run that test because unless their support is there. And most of the cases, like the very big organization like Microsoft, we won't get that response because we trust that they have proper measures in place. We cannot, smaller companies, we cannot go and ask that what kind of measures you are having it in place, give it in documentation. So how to deal with it?
Okay, so let's try Anthony and maybe Raghavendra as well. Anthony, would you like to take that question, please?
Well, with the cloud, there's always the shared responsibility model. The provider themselves, whether that's Azure or AWS or Google, they have a certain level of responsibility to ensure the uptime of the hardware, of the cloud environment, etc. And then it's up to your organization to handle the security of the data that you put into the cloud. Now, there are various ways you can do that. When I speak to customers, the way I like to talk about it is you've got two basic choices. The first is around identity. If you consider identity as the new perimeter, only authorized people can access that particular type of data and ensure that you have strong provisions around that identity. That's one way of ensuring that only authorized people can get in. Now, obviously, as we've talked about, we're all human, we make mistakes as well. So that's when you also include and can use the functionality that's built into the cloud provider. Now, AWS includes some functionality there. I believe it goes into, I think it's called guard duty from memory. Forgive me if I've gotten that wrong. And then there's also the same type of technology that Azure has with Microsoft. And they will give you alerts, and it's watching those alerts and looking for things that are suspicious. You can also move into the area of CSPM, where you can actually start paying attention to what the cloud environment is doing. Again, simple human error. I, as an administrator, can come in, accidentally change a setting and expose everything. And of course, simple human error, but a CSPM solution can alert you to that and say, something's gone wrong here, you should fix this right now. So that is my quick response to that.
Okay,
so
let Raghavendra, in case you'd like to add something to that.
Yeah, I think the shared responsibility is something that we will have to really understand and have that documented and also follow it through, because a lot of times the things fall through the cracks where we believe that it is outsourced to cloud provider, it's cloud provider's responsibility and not ours, and so on and so forth. So having that shared responsibility clearly laid out and also have a conversation with them that this is what I believe is my responsibility, this is where the handoff is, and so on and so forth, basically helps a lot in terms of avoiding that challenge. And then, of course, Anthony did mention about multiple technologies that can be used to identify and provide early signals and early warnings, be it monitoring cloud trial logs on, say, AWS and subscribing to, say, guard duty on AWS or subscribing to Microsoft Log Analytics and Sentinel kind of solutions, which can actually have some rules and trigger alarms on their platform so that we could take next steps. But having said that, Sripriya, I think you have a very valid question where the cloud providers are also in the same game, same boat. You need to understand they are also catching up, right, on many of these aspects, because it's not that we can just say cloud provider is going to be owning everything and they would be very secure, right? They are also in the same boat. They are also navigating the same path. So I think a collective effort is what is necessary, and having clarity and shared responsibility is going to be important.
Okay, thank you so much, Fincare, for joining us with your question. We are talking about the tabletop exercise, Raghavendra. Where does it fall in the cracks when it's time for execution?
Fantastic, very good question. So again, Ashu, what we have seen, I've been to some of these incident response crisis situations, high-profile ones in India, and most of the times they would have done tabletop exercise, and they would have come out with flying colors. So the degree of depth that we use in tabletop exercise is going to be very important. And it is not like once in an annual exercise where somebody does a tabletop exercise and they just go through that motion, but rather it's kind of becoming large organizations of adopting on a quarterly basis where you come up with new scenarios every time when you perform a tabletop exercise. You're not just going by one standard script or one standard method, but rather you are looking at what's happening in the dark web, what are the new tactics, what are the new techniques, what are the new procedures that the attackers are adopting, and then changing your scenarios accordingly and going through on a periodic basis at what has been the best practices. Of course, this is some of the large organizations could do it in a much more highly frequent manner and update what we call it as playbooks, which is basically how do you respond if this scenario happens, right? What are your standard operating procedures? So that's what has happened in large organizations. Smaller organizations can take very simple measures, but more prudent measures. Say, can I really test my backup? Right? It's as simple, right? We have seen many organizations even today that go through ransomware. They believe they have a backup. They all believe it's day 7. We keep talking about after the attack, do you have a backup? They say, yeah, we have backup. Don't worry, we're going to restore from the backup. And then okay, let's go and see where the backup is, right? And then we go there, and all the backup files are also encrypted. So we've seen many scenarios where even the backups which has got modernized to an extent and forgotten some of the traditional backup methods have actually fallen through the cracks, and we don't really see the backups coming back. So these are some simple measures, even not so very large organizations who can afford to do periodic or a more frequent tabletop exercises can adopt to some of these basic guardrails where when we do, even if it is annually, we go in depth and try and test out very clearly. So that's one thing. Second thing is, in a situation, what goes wrong? Most of the situations, either we or someone else who's a cybersecurity incident responder is called in on, say, day 2 or day 3 of the incident, and we log into the bridge and we still see chaos. Most of the time, what we call it as the golden hour, where we have to protect and look at some of the evidences, erosion of evidences, and so on and so forth, people are talking about whose fault it was. And that is, even today, is one of the biggest things where we lose big time, about close to 24 to 48 hours in most of our incident response, where we have to calm everyone down and say, let's get back and let's do what is required from a restoration standpoint. Let's go find out what we call it as patient zero, where the attacker actually started on from, so that we could start finding some of the tactics, techniques, and procedures and start updating our system so that it can actually contain further attack spread and also remediate. So that's again something that we have learned in every incident. We continue to learn, actually speaking.
Okay, let's try and understand from Sovon. And again, a lot of my interest is in the financial services space, which is why, Sovon I would like more questions also from Sovon as well. And that's why that question earlier about the challenges faced by smaller banks vis-a-vis the larger banks. So Sovon, major threat trends and tactics, techniques that are being used by attackers, what could they be that will impact businesses in the year ahead? Why I ask you is, again, the touchy nature for financial services companies, regulatory issues, plus the business continuity and all that.
So you need to understand the very nature of the bank or financial institution is the basis is of trust. Imagine a situation, you are going to book a ticket, you are paying after a restaurant bill once you have had your meal, or you are paying someone bills at the hospital for a critical procedure, and you've seen that your money is not available. What would be your trust? So the day trust will go away, the bank or any financial institution will not exist. So and believe me, availability of the system, and if you see RBI latest all these guidelines, even if you cannot have more than 4 hours or some amount of time, your ATMs are unavailable. Earlier days we used to see the ATMs are unavailable or out of service for days, for months. You will see there is a drastic changes. Your system cannot go unavailable, and one of the major concern is today's area. I'm telling you a practical problem. You will not inform the regulators the incident. A user on a Twitter will mark it to the RBI governor or the finance minister. I'm telling you, the power of common man due to digitization. And the question will come from them, this bank, this system is down, what action, what is the cause and what is this thing? That's why any incident happened, it has to be intimated to CERT, IN or RBI within 6 hours. That's become the parameter. And if you have a downtime of a critical system more than an hour, you have to go and proactively tell. Other than cyber attacks, there is any downtime like that. Every day we are reporting to RBI any downtimes in last 24 hours proactively. So the availability of financial systems has become paramount. I can ask Anthony, if you forgotten your purse, you have money in your pocket, can you go out and travel the entire length and breadth of the country with your mobile phone? Can you think about it?
Me? No, I'm not smart enough to do that. No, but no, it's a big challenge. That's correct.
In India, if you have your mobile phone in your pocket, you can send across money, you can eat in a dhaba, and you can travel in any transport. I'm telling you, only you need. This has become our wallet. That's where we have reached in terms of banking or financial services. You need to just scan the QR code or through mobile banking also. Everything is possible, bank-to-bank transaction and all these things. So
and that's the reason why you need that security, that enhanced security. And that's why the reaction also from the people. You mentioned about people putting it on Twitter or whichever social media it could be. That could be the reason why that kind of reaction comes, whether it involves a mobile phone, again, 1 billion mobile connections. And again, we are not there. About 1 billion or so, I would imagine, if you include phone banking, there would be something like that who are users.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That's what I'm telling you. So the attack surface has been increased manifold. It's not limited to present as only IB and MB. The supply chain has become to run your any of the system, your other enabled payment services or anything. There are so many intermediaries which are working in between the ecosystem. So bank itself has become a service provider, and they have taken services from so many of these things. It's a complex ecosystem. So if you look into that entire ecosystem, how will you, because the world power up, something you cannot measure, you cannot manage, then how will you measure? You can measure your own system. What's about the supply chain connected to different other systems, ecosystems? So fundamentally, the data path through which the data is flowing, the connections are being made, it has become a humongous challenge. So as we grow up, I think the trust relationship, validation, what do you say, zero trust between organization or between systems also. If I'm connecting to that, it's becoming an API-based economy. The API will be fully tested, and that will be only able to do this much. Your API should not become the attack path or the escalation path between this connectivity. So that also has to be looked into. I believe the challenges are going on, the attacks are increasing, but what we need is what I strongly believe is collective and collaborative cyber threat intelligence. One part, something is happening, the other part should be knowing that this type of attacks are going on so that preventive measures can be taken. That's why you have seen that within 6 hours you have to intimate search so that they can take that learning from them on whatever data is available and can pass on to the other entities. And collectively, if we fight.
Okay, CERT, Anthony, what Sovon was referring to is the certified emergency
Computer
response
emergency response team.
Computer emergency response team, which is a government entity who you have to report to all such breaches that happen. And there's this time limit schedule where you have to report, otherwise you get into some kind of a regulatory issue. Okay, but we have some questions coming in. So because I promised we'll take some. So let's take some and I'll try and put it to everyone. Any mid-sized company, Sairaj says, will be scared seeing how security can be breached. How can such companies protect themselves by having some fundamental good practices? This is specifically for smaller companies. Harish, would you like to mention? And then I'll come to you, Vijay, as well.
Yeah, so basically, see, not for small or the mid, it is for the large and large enterprises also. So we have to work for our basics. So wherever you see and all the incident of this year and the last you have seen, it is more and related to the basics, like either the identity has breached because the credentials are not changed, or it's the old credentials are saved somewhere, or the two-factor authentication is not there. So these are the basics. So like you have to work on your access rights review, basically. So you should know where are your admins and how longer they are using the same credentials. The admins should have a different password for all the system. It should not be that, okay, there could be administrator who has a control of 10 to 20 systems, but the password is same for all the 10, 20 systems. So this is very basic. It should not be. This is, yeah. And because access rights, you should limit your access roles, privilege access, basically. So all should not have all kind of access. It should be limited. It should be regularly reviewed, and your patching. So I know that Raghavendra mentioned in the beginning, we can't patch all kind of vulnerabilities in 1 day or 2 days. But yes, we can prioritize our vulnerability based on the exploit. So we know every day there are a lot of vulnerabilities are getting released of different products. So we have to work on, okay, which all the vulnerabilities are exploitable, which are there present in my environment. Take those on priority, patch it within a day or two, although the 24 hours, 48 hours is still a long period, but yes, patch it as soon as possible and you can safeguard, because exploitable vulnerability is something which is easily exploitable in the open and it is present. Rest of the vulnerabilities is something you can work. So these are the basics, like I'll suggest every organization has to work on, and tools are definitely, like there are tools, they will definitely help you, but all will work on the base.
Okay, so I must mention here that one of the questions also said somebody wanted a link because he's found some of the suggestions, some of the comments from you very useful. So they wanted a link to the entire conversation, which we'll put on YouTube, and that will, of course, be available. The next question comes from Justin.
Yeah, so Ashutosh, let me add to the last question.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think it's always better to adopt a structured framework. And I think Sovon talked about something called...
Sorry to interrupt, Vijay, for a mid-sized company, if you just with that in mind, please.
Correct. So that's what I was referring to. So Sovon talked about NIST CSF, which becomes a little overwhelming for a mid-sized company, right? So there are a few things which I can recommend. There is a framework called Cyber Essentials, which is kindly adopted in UK. Which helps you at least make sure from a small and mid-sized business perspective that the basic cyber hygiene is put in place. People can look at something called Essentials 8. Essentials 8 is a cybersecurity framework which is adopted in Australia. It talks about 7 or 8 critical controls which mid-sized and small businesses can really look at, which can give them adequate level of protection, right? I mean, in cybersecurity, we use a term called pyramid of pain, right? And a lot of people talked about it. today also about 80 to 90% of the attacks don't leverage 0-day or very advanced malwares and all, right? I mean, they are basic vulnerabilities which has been in the wild from ages, right? The basic issues on identity and access management, right? So Cyber Essentials can be one which can be adopted. Essentials 8 is another one which can be looked at. My personal favorite is what we call as SANS Top 20. Now it is called the CIS Top 18. So that is very relevant for even for small to a mid-size organization, right? So definitely look at these three, and for the larger enterprise, of course, then we have NIST, CSF, ISO, and a lot of other ones. But Cyber Essentials, Essentials 8, and CIS Top 18 can be the good frameworks to be adopted.
For mid-sized companies.
I just want to add one more point.
Sure.
I think to what Harish and Vijay mentioned, I think testing backups, I'm sorry to reiterate, but testing backup is a very simple step. And if we did that, we will be the ones who can restore, even in the case of ransomware, quite quickly. Because of the incidents that we have been through, I think this is something which is very basic, offline backup, testing it rigorously. Any company can do it.
Okay. Time for another poll question. So let's see how alert people who are watching us are. Let's pop up the poll question. For consumer data, for customer data that you store in the cloud, what security practices does the company practice or follow? Security is layered, we spoke about it. Data is identified and encrypted. Regular assessments are being done, and another option is policies relooked every year. So let's see what the responses are. So we have about 30 odd people who've responded, and we'll wait for about half the viewers to put in their answers. And okay, I see data being identified and encrypted seems to be among the choice that people are making. Okay, just about, I think, time enough for putting an end to this poll. So about 55 answers out of about half the people have answered, and that's the answer. About 49% data is identified and encrypted. That's what the answer from the people are.
Very dangerous from my mind. If I see in security, it's a CI triad availability. You identified, you encrypted, your access control is not good. Somebody come and double encrypt it. Your data is gone.
Anthony?
Well, my background is cryptography, so yes, double encryption is a problem. If somebody else comes along and encrypts your data, that is a big issue. You're not getting it
that's
back.
also a ransomware attack.
Yeah, ransomware does exactly that. That's correct. So, I mean, there is nothing wrong with encrypting data. Encrypting data, especially data in transit or data at rest, is an important step, and I would suggest it. And a simple example for data at rest is full disk encryption. If your laptop is switched off, it's encrypted, it's protected. Nobody can rip out the hard disk and get the data. But access control is just as important, because if you can't access the data in the first place, you can't accidentally delete it, accidentally encrypt it, or if I was an attacker, maliciously encrypt it or delete it. You need both,
yes.
at least that in mind. So, I mean, between identity control, access control, which is anything from ensuring least privileges, least amount of access, and the ability to encrypt, especially sensitive data. Now, sensitive data can be anything like PII, personally identifiable information, credit card information, anything that you deem to be private or company secrets or something that just needs to be secure. Encrypt that by all means. If in doubt, just encrypt it anyway and make sure that you control access to it.
Okay, so very valid point that Sovon and Anthony have made. Let's move on to the next question there, and this comes from Justina. It says, India seems very vulnerable to hackers given the numbers that I read about in various publications. Can a government policy drive better protection for businesses? We spoke of CERT, the reporting to CERT, but a policy, Raghavendra, a policy from government, you can have a reporting mechanism, but a policy cannot prevent an attack.
Now, I think the good amount of regulatory guidelines that are coming in play, especially if you look at the data privacy one that is being debated right now, that I think the one that is going to come out, we are strong believers in that data privacy law, which is making it very simple from the previous one for our consumers as well as for small to medium businesses in concepts like deemed consent and so on and so forth. I think those guidelines and regulatory movements are happening. There's also a good amount of education that government has initiated, especially in terms of various forums that they partner with, so that they could actually spread the awareness in the country. Having said that, I think there is something that we could always look at is how can it be more monetized for small to medium businesses to be able to adopt and also get some kind of tax SOPs to drive cyber funding, especially one of the elements that we look at challenges. There isn't enough funding in small to medium businesses to actually do all that we want to do within cyber, right? Well, we talked about some of the fundamental steps, but then we also have to be cognizant of the fact that attackers are quite advanced, right? So while we take the fundamental steps, we also have to move in the same direction, and it draws some good amount of investments. I think that's a kind of a debated topic right now, but otherwise there are some good amount of guidance as Sovon talked about. The RBI guidelines there are specific guidelines by each industry that's coming up, so that they can actually adopt some of these guidelines and then implement within their environment based on a risk management model, and what they deem as too risky is where they spend more money on. So that's the kind of model that's coming up, and I think data privacy is something that's out on the horizon right now, which should come out anytime.
I believe the question was marked as fine part, because without the traffic fine, anybody would follow the traffic rules. I don't believe so in some of this. So I believe the question comes from that conviction that if you are not following, you will be jailed, you will be fined 100, 200 crore, plus like GDPR, that type of things. I probably, the question, the direction of the question on that line, yes, and that IT Act is very strong. None of the IT professional knows, believe me.
Yeah.
If people, government of India started conviction, half of the people who has been without doing anything, without any controls, handling customer data, breaches happened, they would have gone to jail. But the conviction rate is low. India prosecution rate is low. That is there. I'd probably, that's for the coming is the monetary fine. Yes, the first of that kind is coming in terms of privacy bills, which is proposed for 200 crore. Let's see. 500
crore. Yeah. To 500 crore for each instance.
My God.
Yeah.
So,
I think the other thing that we have to think about, especially for the smaller companies, can they find the staff who are actually capable of carrying out all of this work? I mean, that's not necessarily an easy task, nor is it necessarily cheap. It's great to have guidelines, and there is plenty that have been mentioned, like SANS, Essential 8, etc., that customers can look at and say, this is how I want to move forward in a structured way. And there can be plenty of even government guidelines and suggestions on what to do. The problem is the organizations need to be able to do that. And that's when, like I mentioned before, there's no shame in putting up your hand and asking for help, going, I can't do this. I need help. Somebody please come and help me to do this. Managed detection response providers, an MSSP, even a consultant, just ask for help on, I don't know what to do, please help me. It is always good for an organization.
You've almost stolen the question from my mind, Anthony, because that's what I was going to ask Vijay. Given the criticality of it, given the number of instances that we're seeing, Vijay, how does the industry address the issue of needing more cybersecurity professionals and good quality ones at that?
Yeah, I think multiple things needs to happen for that, Ashutosh. And being in cybersecurity, we have been facing this challenge from quite some time, right? In terms of not only the number of attacks, right? The attack surface has increased multifold. So some of the traditional skills which people had, right? Not necessarily the security in on-premise is very, very different than security on cloud. Securing a server is very, very different in terms of trying to secure a serverless and API architecture, right? So it's not only about the question of availability of resources, but the pace at which we have been able to train them. They have been able to adapt some of these emerging technologies, right? I mean, today, we have already started talking about AR, VR, metaverse, and people are asking security architects on metaverse. I mean, where has metaverse development started, and suddenly we are starting seeing the need of security architects on metaverse as well, right? So now I think there are multiple ways to do it. Essentially, one, we have to understand that there's a lot of it in security where certain tools like AI, ML, and automation can help. And we are trying to leverage that, right? I mean, as Anthony also talked about, many times it becomes a question of finding needle in the haystack. So a lot of cybersecurity professional times really get spent on chasing false positives, on chasing events and incidents which may not be true incidents, which may be false positives and all, right? So trying to leverage tools and technologies which brings a little bit of artificial intelligence, which brings a little bit of RPA kind of processes, we call it as security orchestration, which can help you solve some of the level 1 kind of activities and level 1 kind of tasks, right? So that's one. Second, we should definitely leverage specialized firms which are, and platform providers, right, which are trying to bring in multiple features and capabilities onto a platform, which can definitely help address some of the challenges with respect to manageability, with respect to the skill set on multiple tools and platforms, can definitely help. And not very good thing for service providers like us, but a lot of product companies have not also started moving in services today, right? I mean, if you look at MDR, EDR providers and all, and it makes sense to some extent, right? Where you can leverage your product provider itself in terms of some of the services which they have been offering. But again, yes, we have to continuously work on making sure that the upskilling and training part of some of these things is addressed. Working with a lot of, we call it finishing schools, right, in terms of how they can contribute towards providing us more trained freshers or young graduates when they come out of the colleges. We have been working with even institutes, right, in terms of helping them define some of the cybersecurity curriculum, right, which is in need of the industry. So I think efforts are happening, and NASSCOM has a special initiative around that, right? I mean, a lot of work which has been done by NASSCOM, BSCI, and I know a lot of people in the industry itself, which has been kind of doing quite a lot of these things on a non-profit models as well, right? So it still remains a challenge, but I think there are ways in terms of trying to leverage newer set of tools and automation. Of course, leverage some of the specialized capabilities which a security service provider can bring to the table instead of trying to build it in-house. And continuously focus on skill enrichment, I think, is very, very essential.
Okay, so before I go to Anthony for a final word, maybe Raghavendra, if I can ask you, without taking any names, what is the most critical incident that you may have heard of, you may have handled, without taking any names? Again, this is just to explain the scale of the problem that can happen. Would you like to share any anecdotes like that?
Commerce clients went into this challenge. I think it's was sharing a story about an e-commerce client where the situation was quite worse, and this is a client where we got involved in day 7, and there was still chaos going on. That who's at fault, rather than trying to bring back the systems, identify what's the challenge, and remediate. So we had to get into the act quickly on trying to identify what the tactics, techniques, procedures adopted in that environment, trying to contain so that we don't spread that any further. And then actually, when we started looking at backup, in most of these situations, the biggest question comes back is, do we have to pay ransom or do we not have to pay ransom? So it all depends. To be honest with you, it's all depends on the business. It's not a cybersecurity expert's call, actually speaking. In most of the times, it's a board decision, right? On how to navigate, how to take this. And boards are completely involved in such situations. And it's quite stressful, like Vijay mentioned. It's like continuous. And this was one of my Diwali weekends. And I didn't have a Diwali. You can imagine what would have been the state. So I think it's quite stressful, say 36, 48 hours in a row that you are updating multiple stakeholders. Communication management is extremely important to manage communication both with the media, internally with the employees if they're impacted, and then also have constant interactions with the board, having so many questions, because they get questioned from different sources. So they should have adequately prepared answers to respond and then get back. Because most of the times when you start on this journey, you don't know where the problem started, right? It takes time to investigate. So the time to investigate, between the time to investigate, you would be bombarded with so many questions from different sources. You can't ignore any of them. You would still have to provide what you know at that point in time and keep the communication channel. So keeping the communication on is going to be an extremely important step, and I would say is critical in an incident response scenario. As much critical as to recover the systems and get back to the business.
Okay, so it could get, well, perhaps worse, God forbid, but that's how serious it can get. Anthony, your final word and a word you'd like to say to everyone here as well.
Well, we've all talked about how bad things can be. The nice thing that I take away from this is people are already thinking about how they can turn it around, how they can make it better. That's the positive vibe that I take away from this. It's not that people are ignoring it. They're going, I recognize there's something I need to do. Help me move forward, which is all good. So what I think we've talked about here today is that all organizations, they need to keep cybersecurity as a key focus, as a core part of their business as they move forward. We've talked about various ways that they could do that, whether that's following a specific guideline like SANS or Essential 8, or at least just putting their best foot forward, which is all we can ask of most IT or nearly all IT teams. I think having an incident plan, like we've talked about, is a good thing as well. I will say, and I will quote a CISO from a school who lives nearby. Whenever you are breached, you may have the best incident plan ever, but you will be breached in an area you never considered, which I thought was actually very interesting words of advice and very good ones as well. So have an incident response plan. When something goes wrong, don't panic. Rely on the plan. Believe in your team. You've put them there for a reason. Follow the plan. Mr. Raghavendra talked about it a lot. Don't panic, even though it's very easy to panic. Stay calm, trust in your team, your security, but it also means you have to watch things 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How can you do that? Is that an automated system? Is that your team? What's the answer? At the very least, start with the best protection you can, whatever you consider to be the best step forward, so that you can, if anything does happen, you can limit the time to detect and respond to any particular incident. Even buying you that time gives an incident response team valuable minutes or seconds that stops the attack from going further. So in closing, I would like to thank our panel for their time today, their valuable insights and their valuable advice that they've given the audience as well. It was a fantastic discussion. So Mr. Raghavendra, Mr. Vijay, Mr. Sovon, Mr. Harish, thank you very much for your time today and the wisdom that you have shared. And on behalf of the audience, I would like to thank you as well. Additionally, I would like to thank you, Mr. Ashu, for your excellent moderation of our panel today. And for all of the attendees, thank you very much for your time and attending today. And I hope that you've learned some valuable tips and tricks from our panel of experts today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone joining us today. Anthony, Harish, Sovon, Raghavendra, and Vijay for your time today as well. This is a topic that will require attention and constant revision, and we need to come back to you again and again. We probably end up learning new things as we speak more and more. Thank you so much for being with us, and have a wonderful week ahead.
Bye-bye.